So one question I've gotten a few times since working on Bushcraft Survival is basically how do I use the pipeline add-on that I made? How do I use that in this game that I'm making? So today I'm going to show you one of the ways in which I'm using the pipeline. So the pipeline itself is not prescriptive. Like, it doesn't tell you how you should do anything. It gives you a set of tools that you can use in a variety of ways, right? So in this case, I've got this cabin model that I'm working on, and the end result that I want to get to, I'm going to show you what it looks like in the engine, right? Is a bunch of collision shapes. So the way I'm using the pipeline in this case is I'm just using it to auto-generate a bunch of primitive collision shapes. And the reason I want to do that is because it would be painful to try to get all these boxes set up in Godot properly, and just doing it with the pipeline is quick. So in this very specific instance, I'm using like kind of a variety of workflows. I'm not going to get into the whole thing because the cabin itself is kind of complicated. I think that deserves its own video basically. But just to take it back a step before we jump into collisions, the way this works is that I found this cabin model online, and I did remodel it pretty much from scratch. Most things, 90% of this actually is remodeled. All the logs and everything are remodeled. The only thing I kept actually is the roof and the door, I think. No, I remodeled the door too. Never mind. So I remodeled basically everything, but I used kind of the composition of the original cabin and some of the colors. It's modular, right? So when I build this out, I'll show you what it looks like. I have these different buildings that you can that I make just by using the modules. So the whole rendering thing and how I'm doing this in Godot, I'm using vertex colors to tint the wood material. I'm doing a mixture of like some grunge masks, some grunge textures on the background, but I've got some pretty high res repeating tiling textures. So this workflow actually works super well, and each cabin ends up only being 4 draw calls. So I'm not going to spend the video talking about that. Like I said, I might do a separate video on that, but what I am going to show you is how in this case did I use the pipeline. So those are the modular pieces. And then I have this other collection here called Building One Combined. All right. So Building One Combined basically bakes everything down into 4 meshes, right? There's the cabin body itself, the roof, the door. And the only reason the door needs to be its own mesh, well, there's a couple of good reasons actually. The steel is a separate material, so that wouldn't jive with the rest of the wood. But also it needs to pivot on this origin point, right? So it needs to be its own mesh just for that reason. And yeah, so those are the 4 meshes. I think I might have missed windows, but windows are actually rendered in Godot. There's not much we do with them here in Blender. But what I want to do is I want to take this combined building one mesh and make some collisions out of it. So I'm going to hide this, and ultimately what I want to get is these pieces. So what I want to do is I'm going to walk through this process again, but one of the different building types, just to show you kind of my own thought process and how I make that work. I guess a little bit more of the fundamentals before we go any further. On the Godot side, of course, you do have to have the Blender-Godot pipeline add-on needs to be installed, right? For the GLTF file that you're using, I'm calling mine cabin_col. You do need to have the import script hooked up. So the import script in this case is gltf importer.gd. And that comes right from the Godot side add-on, okay? So that's kind of the basic setup. In this game, I'm only enabling the pipeline on an individual basis, right? I'm not doing it for every single mesh. Different meshes have different workflows. Like if you looked at my first-person character controller, it's a totally separate workflow. I'm not using the pipeline for that. But in this case, it's a perfectly good reason to use it. Okay, and then of course, once that's set up, I just drag it into the scene, and then there I get my shapes. So I want to do this same thing, but I'm going to do it for a different building just to walk through it. Okay, so let's look at building 2. This one's actually trickier, so this is a good example in a way because the shape is more complicated. But I want to make, collision shapes out of this mesh, basically. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull out the cabin itself. I've already got the door collision created here. So for instance, you see the door here somewhere, right? So there's the door, and you might notice that the collision shape on its own is not going to pivot correctly, but once it gets reparented to, it'll eventually be a physics body, but just to show you how it works, if I reparent it to the door mesh, we can pivot the door mesh at the right location, and you notice that collision shape wraps really nicely, right? So characters aren't going to be clipping through that. It's a nice, primitive collision. It's going to have to go on an animatable body, right, so that it can move. But the door is already done, basically, so I'm not worried about that. I just want to do the cabin itself. So I'm going to duplicate this cabin mesh, Control D, Shift D, sorry. I don't want a linked duplicate, I want a new duplicate. And I'm going to move this to a new collection, building to collisions. Okay. I'll hide the original one there, and then we'll just work with this. So what I'm trying to figure out here is like, how do I want to break this shape down and make collision shapes out of it, right? There's a million ways to chop this up. But what I kind of decided in the last one I did, I might set this to pivot on 3D cursor, right? So the way I set it up last time is if you look at this, I want this kind of, yeah, maybe that's a bit better, is the 3D pillars, okay? These little, easier to show it. These things are really what I want, right? So I'm actually going to extract all the pillars that are relevant to the collision shape. And I'll explain what that means in a bit. So I'm just doing Control L to select all similar, Shift and Control L. And I'm going to pull out these 4 as well. So a couple more. Actually, that 3D lock is really not helping me that much. So we're going to take that off. All right, one more, I think. Okay. So these pillars can help me create all of these different wall surfaces, and we're going to have to deal with the door frame after as well. After that, I want to create the roof pieces, and these are going to be a little bit tricky, but there's a pretty nice way of doing that anyways. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll separate these by selection. We'll hide that. And now we basically have a bunch of wall pieces to make. So it can get a little tedious, I suppose, but basically I'm going to duplicate that part, and we're going to call this, let's call this front, right? So I think I renamed the wrong thing. Here we go. So this piece here is what I'll call the front. And just to explain quickly why I'm doing what I'm doing, if I jump into the pipeline and I have these settings, so I'm going to create a box collision. There's not going to be any body on it. Display wireframe, preserve the origin, and then set the collisions. That just creates that box collision for me. So when I import it in the engine, it'll fit right on that mesh. Okay, so now we kind of just rinse and repeat for the rest. Right, so Shift D to duplicate, separate by selection. I'll call this left. I keep mixing these up. I think, yeah, this one's going to be left. Sorry, Blender's not working with me today. Here we go. And then same thing, set collision. So we can kind of repeat this process. And I'll do the backside here. Shift D. P to separate. We'll call this, I guess if that's, what did I call front? That's front, this will be back. Okay. And then we've got a couple more kind of interior ones. So I will call this right 1. And we want to do right 2 here. So you can see there's a little bit of, I don't know, grunt work here, I guess. But the point is to get all these box collisions just created for us, right? Okay, so almost there. It's kind of cool. You don't even need to have everything selected. It just finds the bounding box on whatever vertices you kind of pull out. So don't sweat it too much, honestly, if you don't select everything perfectly. I think I'm keeping X-ray on, which just kind of helps you grab everything. And I'll call this entrance 2. Okay. And I want to make that a box collision. So that's pretty good. We're going to have a bit of a problem here with the door frame, but this is pretty easy to deal with. There's a couple of ways we can do it. I can grab these posts here and we can duplicate them. Remember, these meshes are just like dummy meshes for your own, collision creation. And if you can do this faster in Blender than you can Godot, then, all the power to you. I'll make this into one wall. We'll call this door 1, and we'll call this door 2. Okay. And you can shift select multiple of these at once as well, and it does the same thing. So another good thing about this, I suppose, is that this keeps the origin of all these pieces at the same spot, which is actually the hinge of the door, which is good, right? So all those collision shapes are retained. So before even going any further, I guess the other thing to mention is I did set up a collision path here. So cabin_col.gltf, hit export. And we can see this here. Now, this doesn't match the mesh I'm working with here. There's more layers to this little system. Right, so what I'm actually going to do is these different variants of this cabin model, I'm actually going to manipulate with this number. It's just an exported variable right now, but ultimately it's going to be something that's kind of randomly generated, and it actually plays into some of the game mechanics around looting and whether or not there's a fireplace inside and some things like that. Okay, so you can see those collisions are wrapped perfectly. And what I'm going to want to do after is I'm going to take all these collisions and separate them out, right? And put them in their own nodes. So really this process here is just to get this data, right? We have all the box shape sizes. We have all of the transforms and rotations and everything we need. Okay. Now the tricky part about this model is going to be the roof actually. Okay. So I'll show you how I'll do that. Okay. So I think we're done with these posts. So we can probably just delete that. So to do the roof, these two sections across the top, right, this section here and this section here are probably the easiest. I'll show you what I mean by that in a sec. So let's get this. We're not in X-ray. I'm going to actually switch to, it gets real hard to see when you have all the bevel lines and everything on here. So let's turn off bevels. Yeah, it's a bit better. And sharp, I guess. Yeah. All right. So what I want to do is I want to take this piece and this piece, and we're going to create that roof out of that, right? So we can just separate by selection, same as before. Now this part's a bit different. I'll show you probably what your first instinct is going to be to create this collision shape and why that's not going to work. If you try to just create that box collision right on that, it's going to create this giant box because it's creating the bounding box in the world space coordinates, right? It's not the local coordinates of this model. So what we need to do, I'll try to get an orientation I like here, is I'm actually going to rotate this, keeping its origin where it's at. I'm going to rotate it until it's pretty much flat. And I mean, this is a bit of an eyeballing process. But it's good enough. You'll see in a second, this will wrap really well. So that piece is pretty much flat, but you'll notice now it has a rotation on X, okay? So we don't want this rotation, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna copy that value, and then I'm going to Control A, apply rotation and scale, okay? So now when I try to apply the box collision, it wraps perfectly. But of course, now we've lost our location. It's not in the right spot. but I copied that X rotation. If I paste it back in, I don't want to rotate the same way again. I actually want to rotate the opposite way. So put in negative, and then it drops it right back in where it needs to be, right? So for me anyways, that's a very quick way of doing that. So we'll do the other side real quick. Control L to select link, shift click, Control L, and separate by selection. I'm just pressing P there, by the way. I should get the Blender hotkeys showing up on screen, but too busy to do that. Okay. So we'll do the same thing with this piece. I'm going to rotate it down, and I'm going to eyeball it until it's roughly level. Now, these meshes are not perfectly flat. I am using the guidelines kind of in the background to help with this process. So once again, I'll copy that rotation. We're going to Control A, apply rotation scale, set the box collision, and then apply the rotation in the negative direction. In this case, it's going to be positive, so the opposite direction. All right, so that's those two. We can export that and see what that looks like. Something went a little wacky there. Let's see. I think it's because I think I need to set the collision again. Let's see. I ran into this earlier. I forgot how I fixed it. Yeah, I think I needed to press set collision again after rotating it because it doesn't really know where it is, right? Every time you move something, you need to reset the collisions. It takes the whole transform of the object into account. Okay, so that's good, right? In my game, I actually have a mechanic where there's ray casts that come down from above the player character to determine if they're covered. Are you in shelter or are you not in shelter? So for me, I definitely will want these collisions. So the last two here, I need a roof over this part. And I may have jumped the gun a little bit because I noticed I didn't bring over the roof object here. I'm not sure how much the roof object will help me, right? Because I want the collision to have some body to it. I don't want it to just be a flat. It needs to be a whole collision shape. So I'm not going to use the roof, actually. I think I'm going to use these trusses here. So I'm going to, actually, let's separate them out first. So P, separate by selection. And then on this piece, I'm going to Shift D to duplicate and kind of bring this back, right? So now I'm going to create the collisions based on these guys. And in fact, I probably want this further. I need this to intersect with the roof, right? So I want it to come back at least to here. It is going to create a collision shape inside as well, but it'll still be primitive, and the engine won't have any problem working that out. Static body colliders, there's no problem if they overlap. Not a big deal. All right, so that origin, we kept that origin in the same place throughout that whole process, which is what we want here. And I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to rotate this down. We'll rotate this down until it's flat. Let's hide this one. All right, so that's pretty good. We'll pull out that, in this case, it's a Y rotation, it looks like, right? Should make sense. And we'll apply rotation and scale and set that collision shape. And I'm realizing there's no point to actually set it there because when you rotate it back, we need to set it again after. Like I said, whenever you rotate or move something, you want to press that set collision. And the reason I have that is just so you have complete control over when it happens. All right, so do the same thing with this guy. We're going to rotate it till it's flat. And this might seem like a weird, like, you know, why are we doing this? The whole point is to get the primitive collision set up, right? It's not easy for Blender to actually know how to wrap that when it's rotated. Like I showed you earlier, it'll put a box around the whole thing, the whole, you know, volume of space. It won't wrap closely to it. There are some other cool tricks, by the way, that you can do with this. You can do the shrink wrap modifier. I've done that in a previous video. That was kind of cool. So I applied that. Let's do set and then rotate back. Okay, and then we'll set again. All right, so if you needed to modify one of these shapes, It's not hard to do. You can pull out, like for me in this case, I can pull out these two faces, right? We might want to do like, I don't know how fancy you want to get with it, right? You could do an edge slide and then C to edge slide out if you want that collision shape to overlap, but for me, I don't care, right? So that's all good. Let's hit export and then see it again. All right, so that's the gist of it, right? And from the building 1 collisions, that door is actually in the same spot. So if I pull out the door and then export that, you see we get the door, right? So it's easy to kind of mix and match these collisions and get them working the way you want to. So that's it. I apologize. The video ran a bit longer than I expected. I probably rambled too much. But that's how I'm using the pipeline in Bushcraft Survival, and it's exactly for things like this where I couldn't be bothered to try to manually author all these collisions. The world I've created is already complex enough as it is with the terrain convex hull collision, so I can't just arbitrarily be throwing in more and more convex hull collisions. It's going to really slow things down, and I am trying to make it performant. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it was good for people who are using the pipeline, want to see how I'm using it. Otherwise, I will catch you next time.